second time, and I call the honourable member for Leichhardt.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I certainly welcome the opportunity to make a contribution to this bill. I think we need to remember that, cast our minds back a little, when Labor came into office in 2007, there were only 4 illegal maritime arrivals in detention. 4, Mr Deputy Speaker. None of them, absolutely none of them, were children. The Howard government had already developed policies that had stopped the boats. That was our legacy for the Rudd and Gillard government to inherit. It didn't take long for them to tear down our successful border protection policies. Within a few years, the floodgates were well and truly open. December 2010, Australia reeled in shock at the sight of asylum seeker boats splintering up against the unforgivable cliffs of Christmas Island. Men, women, children screaming for help as their bodies were plummeted in the rough seas, thrown up onto the rocks and pounded in the debris. Navy and custom crews frantically tried to rescue them, hampered by the poor weather and the huge waves as victims slipped under the water. Local residents watching from the cliff tops, traumatised by a feeling of complete and utter helplessness as they watched people die in front of them, as were many of those in the Navy and the Customs that were trying to rescue, still haunted to this day by those horrible images. This happened again and again as a result of this border chaos. By early 2013, 50,000 irregular maritime arrivals aboard more than 800 boats had swamped our shores, convinced to make the dangerous journey by the propaganda of people smugglers and the negligent policies of Labor. Over 8,000 children were put into detention, with almost 2,000 still detained when we regained office in 2013. Most tragically, there are at least 1,200 deaths that have been recorded, and that's just the ones that we know of. Labor had opened 17 detention centres onshore and reopened 2 offshore facilities in Nauru and Manus, and had blown out the immigration budget by over $11,000 million. Our humanitarian program was consumed by unauthorised arrivals, and not those legitimately waiting in refugee camps around the world. Mr Deputy Speaker, we cannot go back or even contemplate this madness. Coalition has been diligently working to clean up this mess through Operation Sovereign Borders. Again, we've fixed the problem. First, we acted to stop the boats and stop the deaths at sea. Under the Coalition government, there has not been a successful boat arrival for over 800 days, and there has been no deaths at sea. Then we removed all the children from detention once again and closed 17 onshore detention centres. Raf Sherga, for example, in my electorate was one of the 17. And while there was a very small number of people in the Weipa community that benefited for that short period while it was open and were negatively impacted when it was shut down, I can tell you, Mr Deputy Speaker, the broader community would much rather see Sherga used for its original purpose. We restored security in our borders and re-established public confidence in border security, as well as the integrity of our immigration system. This has had a direct benefit. Once again, Australia has become a leading player in the global effort to assist those people who are most in need. We've been able to increase our intake of refugees, the world's 3rd largest permanent settlement program, by more than 35%. We've also been able to take an extra 12,000 refugees from Syrian and Iraqi conflicts. This would not have been possible, Mr Deputy Speaker, without Australia's strong border management policies and confidence in our well-managed migration system. This legislation will amend the Migration Act to prevent IMAs taken to a regional processing country from making valid application for an Australian visa. The bill will apply to all IMAs taken to regional processing countries since July the 19th, 2013. This is the date, of course, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'm sure you're well aware that the then Prime Minister Kevin Rudd declared, as of today, asylum seekers who come here by boat without a visa will never settle in Australia. This legislation applies to people who are currently in regional processing countries, who have left regional processing country, or in another country who are in Australia waiting for transfer back to that regional processing country, or have been taken to a regional processing country in the future. We know that there are people in the regional processing cohort that have already sought and in some cases been granted Australian visas. We've only heard recently in the news, for example, there's a potential marriage scam being investigated at Manus Island after asylum seekers made it to Australia on spouse visas, having married or intending to marry centre workers. If these people travel to Australia, this could encourage others to pursue Australian visa in the hope of long-term settlement. Further to this, these people have voluntarily returned home or settled in a third country, then travel to Australia on a tourist visa. This undermines our investment in their resettlement. It's a backdoor way of circumventing the government's position. This legislation is critical to support the Coalition's key border protection policies, temporary protection visas, offshore processing and the boat turnbacks where it is safe to do so. The bill merely reflects the government's long-standing position that IMAs who have been sent to regional processing country will never be settled permanently in Australia. Importantly, this will communicate to IMAs that, in Manus and Nauru that they will never settle permanently in Australia, no matter what advocates or others may tell them. Unfortunately, while we're trying to resettle people or get them to voluntarily return home, some are refusing to do so because they think, or they have been told, that the policy might change. Deputy Speaker, the Pream has said on many times that while tough, our policy will not change. This necessary confirmation from policy to law to ensure that there is absolutely no doubt. We've seen the tragedies unfold in Europe in recent times, bodies on beaches and the refugee crisis. Now that Europe is toughening up in its border protections, there is concern that people smugglers will again look to Australia and adjust their models. They will continue to take advantage of vulnerable people by trying to convince them to get on boats to Australia and risk their lives at sea. This bill will further undercut the people smugglers' business model. It will communicate unequivocally to the 14,000 waiting in Indonesia to board a people smuggling boat that they will never settle in Australia. On the face of it, it may well seem harsh, but what is even harsher is that when vulnerable people are exploited by people smugglers who are creating an expectation of an outcome from buying it. We know that people smugglers are smart and very social media savvy. They will jump at any perceived chink in the government's message, ready to exploit people's desperate circumstances. Harsh messages is what is needed to take away people's incentive to buy tickets. A As a safeguard, the bill will not apply to an IMA who is under 18 at the time when they were transferred to a regional processing country. And of course, there may well be a legitimate public interest for a reason or someone to come here, and in these cases, ministerial intervention can certainly occur. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we are a country of migrants. That is our strength. But we have to make sure that those who come here want to contribute to our society and will be welcome. In Leichhardt, we've benefited from refugee settlement resulting from people fleeing from conflict in Asia and Europe, Africa and the Middle East. They are supported by organisations such as Centrecare to settle in our region, and they've made wonderful contributions. We only need to go down to Rusty's Markets on a Friday and enjoy the variety of cuisines and products in offer. The reality is that by blocking people smugglers, it allows us to welcome a much larger number of people out of refugee camps. And we've seen pictures of these camps, cramped, barren, under-resourced, filled with traumatised families and sole survivors, of whom hope is a luxury. History shows that people in this situation, who aren't a target of the people smugglers because they don't have a dollar to spend on travel here, are very appreciative of the opportunity to come to Australia. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, it was very well illustrated by the story of young Josephine Yumihosa and her brother Pascal Shimi Mana. When Josephine was aged 8 and Pascal 6, they were separated from their father whilst fleeing war-torn Rwanda to the Congo. Their mother had already been killed a couple of years earlier when the Rwandan war had broken out. Soon after being separated from their father, Josephine and Pascal were also separated. It happened when they were escaping once again from a refugee camp in the Congo, when rebels started a war against Rwandan refugees. To paint a picture of their horrific situation, photojournalist Michael Graham wrote that Rwanda at this time will forever be known as a place where in 1994 genocide consumed every hill and corner, bodies clogged the rivers and the international community turned away. Over subsequent years, Pascal fled conflict in the Congo, Rwanda and Uganda, eventually settling in Kenya and claiming refugee status. Josephine was fortunate to arrive in Australia in 2007 as a 20-year-old Rwandan refugee with her daughter Chantal, and they become Australian citizens 5 years later. This timeline is important, Mr Deputy Speaker, because in 2007 was the tail end of the Howard government, and at this point Australia was accepting an unprecedented number of humanitarian refugees. Josephine was one of those who benefited as a direct result of our strict border controls. In 2010, after searching for Pascal for 14 years, Josephine finally located her brother. She couldn't afford a migration agent, so Josephine, for whom English is her fourth language, helped her brother to apply an offshore humanitarian visa, but this was denied on a technical matter. In June 2013, Josephine approached my office for assistance, which I was happy to provide. We helped her to lodge an application for a refugee and humanitarian visa to bring Pascal to Australia. I'd like to read a few words from a letter that Josephine sent to me around that time. I'm writing to you today to express my deepest and most sincere gratitude. You and Jackie, that's my Jackie Gothard in my office, have done so much for my brother Pascal and I. The job is still not finished, and I know it won't be easy, but I know that you won't give up. I am willing to do whatever I need in order to see my brother alive and safe in Australia. I will provide ways for him to contribute to sustainability in this great country as people living here have given to me. Now, it's been, Mr Deputy Speaker, it's been a very complex and a very difficult process since then, requiring assistance from the then Minister Scott Morrison, the Department of Immigration and Border Protection, the Australian High Commission in Nairobi and the International Organisation for Migration in Canberra operations. I would like, however, to make particular mention of Matthew Newhouse. I met Matthew when I visited Zimbabwe, and he was the Australian Commissioner for Kenya, Rwanda, Tanzania and Uganda. Subsequently, he was posted back to Australia and is now the Assistant Secretary, African Branch for DFAT. After several years of frustration and false starts with Pascal's situation, I reached out to Matthew for some help. It was with his support, knowledge and contacts in Kenya that enabled Pascal to finally arrive in Australia on the 24th of June 2016. You can only imagine how incredibly heartwarming this reuniting of this family must have been. I want to extend a very big thank you to Matthew for finding a path through this very, very complex journey. Pascal now lives with his sister Josephine, who married her wonderful husband David in June last year, 2015. Josephine's daughter Chantal and their new baby Lazarus in Townsville, and they certainly continue to keep in touch with my office. Mr Deputy Speaker, it is people like Josephine, Chantal and Pascal that Australia must be in a position to help. This bill reflects our long-standing position and as we understood it, the bipartisan position that IMAs who have been sent to a regional processing country will never be settled permanently in Australia. By not supporting this legislation, the Leader of the Opposition has shown that his words during the election were absolutely false. If he is serious about border protection, if he's serious about keeping children out of detention, if he's serious about not wanting to see more bodies wash up on the cliffs of Christmas Island, and if he is genuinely committed to offering a humanitarian place for more people like Josephine, Chantal and Pascal, Labor must support this bill, and I commend the bill to the House.
I thank the honourable member for Leichhardt. The question is